All right, welcome back. It's the Part-Time Trader, and today we're going to be looking at the cryptocurrency market. We're going to be taking a look at charts for Bitcoin, Ethereum, Solana, Doge, and XRP to try and work out where are we in the grand scheme of things. Now, those of you who are new to this channel, please do hit subscribe and like if you enjoy any of the content. Remember that none of this is financial advice. I am a mere amateur. Someone who has spent years obsessing over charts, trying to teach myself how to read price action in hope that one day I will reap the rewards, and I'm well on my way. And if you want to be part of that journey with me, then please do hit subscribe and like and help me grow the channel. But remember, you should not be making any financial decisions off the back of anything you see here or on my X profile, which is at Part-Time Charts over on X, what used to be known as Twitter. Right, all that being said, if you are new to the channel, you probably also need to know that I'm not somebody who obsesses over hourly and daily charts. I'm somebody who likes to zoom out, look at the bigger trend, and try to work out where the hell we are going. And this is probably about as big picture as it gets to Bitcoin for Bitcoin. And I wanted to start here because it's not a new chart. It's something that I've posted a few times before. But what I want to do today is just take a real step back and ask myself, has anything changed? My macro view that Bitcoin is slowing down, is losing momentum, that returns are smaller now than they have been in previous cycles, and that Bitcoin is possibly on the precipice of a major correction. And I think that correction will take us much lower than anybody really anticipates in the crypto space. And that's been my thesis pretty much throughout all of this year. And as you can see, price has pretty much just dragged sideways throughout 2025. I mean, yes, we've had some ups and some downs, but largely this looks like much ado about nothing, to be honest. I mean, we've basically been in a range from about 120 down to about 80k, and we've not really deviated from that range for the entirety of this year. So my view remains the same, that Bitcoin is topping out here, and we're starting to see some big weakness now. And if you zoom in and you look at, zoom out and look at the monthly candles, you can see that, in my opinion, there is nothing bullish about this formation here at all. We have hit the upper boundary of this massive log growth trend. We've been rejected, and now you can see prices starting to roll over. But the thing that I always draw people's attention to on this chart is the fact that there's so much excitement out there about Bitcoin. Everybody believes that it's still early, that Bitcoin is going to go to $1 million plus, and that essentially your mission in life should be to dollar cost average and accumulate Bitcoin at all costs. Now, that is an interesting take to have on the market, and one that I know lots of people subscribe to, but I think you just have to look at this log growth chart here to recognize that there are some serious flaws in that view. And the thing that really stands out for me is, I've talked previously about diminishing returns. So this idea that from each cycle in Bitcoin, the returns that an investor can expect are getting smaller and smaller. And you only have to look at what's happened after each of the previous 4 halvings to know that that is the case. So if you go all the way back to the first halving, which took place in 2012, a mere sort of 3 years after Bitcoin's launch with the Genesis block back in 2009, you can see that the gains that got delivered for investors who were early and that took a punt on what was an incredibly risky asset back then, something that you could only pick up on sort of shady exchanges, many of which eventually went bankrupt. The gains that you picked up if you were early enough to get in back in 2012, were absolutely phenomenal. We did 100x, almost 110x post the first halving to the top of that cycle. And then again, you know, the gains weren't quite as profound from there on, but if you look at the halving that took place in 2016, 4 years later, from the point of the halving to the peak of that cycle, Bitcoin did over 30x. And this was, you know, worth remembering that this happened in the space of about a year and a half. So a really short period of time for absolutely life-changing gains to be delivered to investors. And of course, Bitcoin has continued to go up, and by and large, every halving that we see every 4 years has led to a price increase. But the problem is that the price increase that we've seen since the previous halving back in April of 2024 has been pretty small by comparison. Bitcoin was up from the point of the halving to the point of the recent highs that we saw over sort of September and October. Bitcoin was up a mere 100%. Now look, 100% returns in the space of a year and a half, absolutely nothing to be sniffed at, and many seasoned professional investors would say that that is an incredible performance. But let's be honest with ourselves, nobody investing in Bitcoin is hoping to see gains that small, and everybody is anticipating that at some point BTC is going to go parabolic like it has after pretty much every previous halving, and produce the kind of seismic moves that we see from 2012 to 2013, from 2016 to late 2017, early 2018, and so on and so forth. But so far, that hasn't materialized. And what also happens is that normally in Q4 of the post-halving year, so 1 year on from the halving, in Q4 of that year, we see a major top and a correction takes place. And these corrections have been brutal. So from the 2013 correction saw Bitcoin correct 87%. We saw a very similar correction from the peak in late 2017 to the bottom in 2018 of 85%, and so on and so forth. So here we are at the end of Q4 in the post-halving year. Bitcoin is up at this point, because we've pulled back, Bitcoin is up a mere 50% since the halving back in April 2024, and everybody is talking about a parabolic move being on the horizon and Bitcoin going to several $100,000, if not in some cases millions of dollars. But the problem with that is that the charts just do not support it. You look at this, you look at the price action, this growth trend is undoubtedly flattening out, and we are seeing smaller returns off the back of each halving, to the point now where there are lots of other traditional assets that are traded on some of the main indices across the world that have outperformed Bitcoin since the halving in 2024. This is only up a mere 50% over the last year and a half, where you look at the performance of stocks like Nvidia, Netflix, there's loads and loads of stocks out there that you can pick that over the last few years have produced incredible gains. Now, of course, if you go back from sort of trough to peak, Bitcoin is up 450% since early 2023, and there will be lots of people in the comments that will point that out to me and that will tell me that I'm measuring from the wrong point. But the truth is that post-halving returns are undoubtedly diminishing, and if you are investing in Bitcoin with the hope that this thing is going to take off and launch to $1 million plus in the near future, unfortunately, history does not support that particular outcome, because we are in the post-halving year. We're in Q4. We're right at the end of Q4, heading towards Christmas and December 2025, and price action looks lackluster. This, to me, does not look like an asset I can get excited about in the short term. And I expect at the very least we are going to come back into this $30,000 region and retest the lower boundary of this growth trend here, this log growth trend. And what I'll do next is just look at the performance of Bitcoin relative to some other assets out there. And there are two in particular that I want to look at. The first being the Nasdaq, which in recent years has been, globally the highest performing stock index in any major economy. The Nasdaq is 100 of the top technology-focused equities that you can buy, traded on the US market, the US stock exchange. And what you can see here is that the performance of Bitcoin relative to the Nasdaq historically has absolutely boomed. I mean, just look at the size of some of these moves, right? If you were lucky enough to get in, and I say lucky, if you were smart enough to get in sort of 2012, for example, just before the first halving and you held Bitcoin for the next 5 years, you would have outperformed the Nasdaq by 182,000%. I mean, this kind of move is incredible and historically pretty much one of a kind. There are very, very few assets that have been able to outperform major indexes by that margin over such a short period of time. And I say short period of time, but this move was sustained over 5 years. And if you were holding Bitcoin during that period, you have outperformed the leading tech index in the entire world by a huge, huge margin. But the problem is that everybody anticipates that kind of outperformance to continue. So everybody expects that Bitcoin will continue to outperform everything in the world. There's this narrative that Bitcoin is the dream asset because it goes up in a risk on and a risk off environment. It's something that is linked to the performance of the Nasdaq and tech stocks and almost acts as a sort of high beta version of the Nasdaq and outperforms when times are good. But in bad times, everybody expects that BTC is going to be a hedge against inflation, against economic crises, and I just don't buy it. And the charts, for me, paint a very different story too, because look at this peak that we hit in 2017. This is when Bitcoin topped out at about $20,000, I should say, back at the end of 2017. And since then, has price made meaningful new highs? Now, sure, we have made new highs. So we've spent brief periods above this line. We've now, I would say, pretty consistently held above these highs since early 2024. But what's concerning is that we're no longer producing these parabolic moves. When we break a new high, you don't get the kind of upside that you will have seen back in 2016, 17, back in 2012 to 2013. Instead, price is just flattening out. And what's even more concerning is that broadly, you can say that there has been an uptrend. We've made higher highs, we've made higher lows. So, price has broadly trended up. And you can see that in these lows and these highs. But what's worrying is that we put this high back in when Bitcoin and altcoins went parabolic back in 2021. The market topped out versus the Nasdaq here. And since then, price has only just about managed to edge higher and for Bitcoin to make a new high versus the Nasdaq. And what has happened, and I predicted this a few months back, is that having bounced along this support and resistance zone for a few months, back in September, October, price broke back below the 21 high and has now sold off relative to the Nasdaq. So what that means essentially is that if you were to have bought Bitcoin back at the previous highs in 2021, you would now be underperforming the Nasdaq by quite some margin as well, because this sell-off has been pretty precipitous in recent weeks. So ultimately, the Nasdaq is now outperforming Bitcoin and has been since September when this uptrend broke. And we have failed to make a material new high versus the Nasdaq in, 4.5 years, close to 5 years. So I suppose what I want to do with this video is just challenge this assumption that Bitcoin remains the most bullish, most highest performing asset in the world, and that it is set to continue to outperform absolutely everything over the coming years, because I think the charts say something completely different. Whether you're looking at the US dollar chart and you're seeing that we are topping out at the top of this log growth trend, or whether you're looking at Bitcoin versus the Nasdaq and you realize that we've made some nominal new highs relative to 2017 and we're now coming back towards this high for Bitcoin versus the Nasdaq, which was made close to 10 years ago now. This is 8 years ago we made this high, and price is pretty much trading back towards it, and we're about sort of 15-20% off reaching back into this high that was put in 8 years ago. This uptrend has been broken. We are back under the 2021 high, and I believe that these are the early signs of a major shift in trend for Bitcoin that I expect to last at least the next sort of 18 to 24 months, in which Bitcoin underperforms the Nasdaq and frankly underperforms lots of leading equities, one of which being Apple. And this is the Bitcoin versus Apple chart. And sometimes it's really, if you're new to TA, you know, you'll see people posting regularly sort of USD denominated charts, and those obviously tell you loads about price action and where you're going. And I would always advocate starting with a USD chart because that's the major sort of currency pair that Bitcoin is traded in. But charting Bitcoin against other assets gives you a slightly more rounded picture on where the market is at. And Apple's fascinating because if you look at the high, you know, this is the 2016-2017 parabolic move that Bitcoin put in, which sucked a lot of people into the crypto space and really put Bitcoin on the map as an asset that was no longer just a joke, something that people used to, you know, trade nefariously on Silk Road, but was something that actually could break into the mainstream and provide an alternative to fiat currencies, to traditional investments like equities. And 2017 saw Bitcoin reach at its peak a price of about $20,000. But look at what's happened with Bitcoin versus Apple since then. This just starts to look like a massive, either a distribution pattern in which price has ranged, has made a nominal new high, has swiped these two highs here and has got back under. And I think eventually Bitcoin will at the very least trade towards the bottom end of this range. And let me mark out that range for you. That is the space between this high and this low that I'm highlighting here. At the very least, I anticipate we come back down here, which is a huge crash in the price of Bitcoin relative to Apple. Worst case scenario, this is some sort of massive wick-off distribution where you see price come up, take out these highs here, everybody gets really bullish here, price gets back under, and eventually the lows to this range break, and we could see price doing something like this. Now, that is obviously really extreme, and the truth may be that we end up somewhere between the two scenarios. But whichever way you look at it, from my perspective, being bullish after Bitcoin has headed back to these range highs, has eventually taken them out and has tucked back under, normally that is a sign of weakness. And we saw this in 2021 when Bitcoin came up, took out the previous high, got back under, bounced and retested the underside of that previous high. That held as resistance and we got a sell-off. So you see that here. We came up, took out this high, came back down, bounced, retested the underside of that high, and price sold off massively. And remember, this is not Bitcoin versus USD. This is Bitcoin versus Apple. So the other thing that this tells us is that if you bought Bitcoin in late 2017, early 2018, which many people would say was early, right? Bitcoin was trading at what, $20,000 right at this peak here, and is trading up at about $90,000 today and has been as high as $120,000 recently. So lots of people would have said that's early, that you were lucky to get in at those prices. But what's really interesting is that if you would have invested £1,000 in Bitcoin and £1,000 in Apple at the peak of the Bitcoin market back in late 2017, your investment in Apple would now be worth more than your investment in Bitcoin. Because look, the price of Bitcoin versus Apple is now lower than it was back at the peak of the market in 2017 and back at the peak of the market in 2021. Now, to me, that is fascinating because while everybody is constantly screaming that Bitcoin is on the brink of going parabolic, is the best performing asset in the world, is a hedge against inflation, blah, 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 blah. The bulls are absolutely delusional in my view, because what this chart tells me is that I could have bought at any of the previous market peaks in 2017 or 2021. I could have bought Apple, and if I had held it, I would have outperformed Bitcoin. Now, clearly, there has been, during this range, there have been periods of outperformance where Bitcoin has outperformed Apple. But often, well, always, in fact, those are coming on the back of a massive crash. So those are coming off the back of an 80% crash or a 78% crash. So for me, this chart is sobering to anybody who is blindly bullish on Bitcoin and expecting the kind of gains that we've seen in years gone by. I don't think those are coming, and I truly believe that if you were looking at somewhere to invest your money, in the short term at least, because over the next sort of 6 to 12 months, I expect to be flipping bearish on equities as well as the world heads into some sort of financial crisis. And you can view some of my other videos if you want a bit more info on my take on the global economy. But for the foreseeable future, for the next sort of 6 to 12 months, I expect the Nasdaq and stocks like Apple to outperform Bitcoin. Now, that doesn't mean that we couldn't get a small bounce in the short term, but the trend is clear to me that Bitcoin is not bullish against USD, is not bullish against the Nasdaq, and is certainly not bullish against stocks like Apple. So, has anything changed since some of the previous videos that I've been putting out this year, in which I state my thesis that Bitcoin is topping out and is heading into a major bear market? Well, the answer is no. And another clue that I might be right is this chart here, which is stablecoin dominance. So this is the percentage of the market, the cryptocurrency market, that is made up of USDC and USDT. So this is USDC dominance plus USDT dominance. And it essentially allows you to chart the proportion of people that are placing their money in stablecoins. Now, there are some nuances to this, because clearly as the overall crypto market grows, so too does the value of stablecoins, the market cap of stablecoins. But this is specifically dominant. So this is the percentage of the overall cryptocurrency market that is invested in stablecoins. And typically when this is trending down, that's bullish for Bitcoin, as we've seen since the bottom of the BTC correction in late 2022, early 2023. And when it trends up, typically that means over a long enough time frame, you can see here that from late 21 to mid 22, early 23, you can see that that is the period in which Bitcoin crashed. And I can bring the price chart up for you. So if you look at when Bitcoin tops out, it's just as we get this really significant bottom here on stablecoin dominance, and stablecoin dominance goes up massively while Bitcoin is crashing and correcting in 2023. Likewise, as Bitcoin bottoms out, stablecoin dominance drops and Bitcoin roars to new highs. So there is an inverse correlation between this chart and the success of Bitcoin, or the kind of gains people expect to see on Bitcoin. And I have been saying for a long time now that this downtrend would be broken. It has been. It was broken last month in November, and that these range highs would be reclaimed and we would flip them into support before stablecoin dominance heads much, much higher. And I think it's going higher than most people believe is imaginable. I think if we saw 16% as the peak of stablecoin dominance back in 2022, I believe that we're going at least twice as high as that. And Bitcoin and altcoins are going to get absolutely crushed over the next couple of years. And that is what we're seeing. Now, look, it is possible that we see some sort of pullback and retest the breakout before we head higher. Absolutely. And that would mean that there could be a short period where Bitcoin, Ethereum, some altcoins actually perform reasonably well. But in the grand scheme of things, and I told you guys right at the beginning of this video, I'm not interested in daily charts. I'm not interested in hourly movements. I am focused on the bigger picture. And the bigger picture here is that this downtrend in stablecoin dominance has been broken. And now we are retesting these highs which frankly have been tested repeatedly, once, twice. This is the third time that we've tested these highs since 2024, mid 2024, and sooner or later they are going to break, and this is going to move really, really significantly to the upside. So look, Bitcoin looks bearish to me. It looks like it's set to underperform stocks. I do anticipate that we're going to see some sort of blow off top in the Nasdaq and equities over the next sort of 6 to 12 months. I don't think Bitcoin will follow. I think stablecoin dominance breaking out is a really bad sign. And then when I look at some of the altcoins, and again, I've posted this chart before, it's not new, but you just look at this massive uptrend that has held on Ethereum for the best part of a decade, since December 2016. So 9 years this uptrend has held, until in late 2024, we broke down from the uptrend and we back tested it as resistance. We've now come up, and again, we've swiped the high that we put in late 2021, and price is starting to break back under some of these levels here. And I know people think I'm bonkers, but I genuinely think there is a chance that when the tide fully turns on some of these coins, when stable coins begin to trend upward in a really meaningful way, when equities eventually roll over, which I anticipate happens at some point in 2026, that if we are caught in the midst of a financial crisis, I think Ethereum holders, Bitcoin holders are going to be caught with their pants down in a major, major way. And Ethereum could be heading as low as double digits. Now, I know people will think I'm absolutely bonkers for saying that. You don't need to buy into some of these targets, and these are the 3 targets that I have for Ethereum, down at about 350, 176, and as low as the lows that we made during COVID at about $80. You don't need to believe me that price is going to get crushed to this level to see some of the weakness that I'm seeing in this chart. And yes, you might believe that, price is going to correct in a much more shallow way and will bounce back at some point in 2026. But if you strip it all back, what is there to be bullish about here? Look, I've said this recently, that back in 2021, the market put 2 highs in and then came up to take out those highs. Everybody was bullish as we flipped these weekly highs into support, and then price broke down and corrected massively. And from top to bottom on Ethereum, we saw something like an 80% correction back in 2022. Remember, the Nasdaq was trading down during that time and corrected about 30%. And I'm seeing very similar signs that we're on the brink of something like that now. So the market came up in 2024, put 3 highs in. 1, 2, 3. Came back to trade at the sort of lower boundary of this trend line here, and then bounce back. And I will be the first to admit that when this uptrend broke to the downside and we got back under this key support and resistance at 2,150, I thought that was it. I thought lights out, good night, Ethereum is done. What has happened since is that we've traded higher, and I caught some of this move here on X when we flipped this particular support and resistance. I said that we would at the very least come back up and take out these highs, and we have. And for months, from August through to the end of October, so for about 2 months, price was trading above these highs. Everybody was bullish, and it reminded me so much of where we were back here, that the moment this SR gives way and we get back under, that's going to be a really, really bearish sign for Ethereum. And that's what's happened. And not only have we got back under this key support and resistance zone at $4,000, we've also broken back under this trend line, which we reclaimed back in the summer following the first breakdown. So look, at the moment we are resting on support at about 2,800. Price has bounced a little bit. I don't anticipate that price is going to break down overnight. It would not surprise me if we see something like a sort of bounce, a period of consolidation. That could take, as long as 6 months, where price just goes sideways. Everybody gets excited. Equities could rip during that time. Crypto holders would be frustrated that Ethereum and Bitcoin haven't followed. And I suspect, just as everybody's hope is building that equities are the forerunner and that crypto is lagging and is about to play catch up, eventually at some point in 2026, I think this turns over in a big way and starts to head lower. But like I say, you don't have to buy into my downside targets to see that there is weakness in the chart. You just acknowledge that this is not a bullish setup. There's nothing bullish about this setup right now. We've taken out all these highs. We've taken out the all-time high here, and we're now trading back under $4,000. We've lost this uptrend, which has been so key, has held a support all the way from 22 to 25, broke down, was retested. The moment that we reclaimed it, we pushed higher, but now we're back under it. So I just don't see in what world you can look at this chart and say this is on the brink of a parabolic move and that Ethereum is about to go to $15,000, $20,000. I just don't see it. To me, this looks weak. And one thing that I would absolutely have to see if I were going to get bullish is for this downtrend in ETH BTC to break. Now, I called the top on this back in the summer. And I said that just as everybody was bullish, we would probably get rejected from this downtrend, and that has happened. And you can see that Ethereum has underperformed BTC since August. And the only way that I could become super bullish on Ethereum is if we get some sort of break and holding above on the weekly basis this downtrend. Until that happens, Ethereum is going to underperform Bitcoin, and given the state of the Bitcoin chart, I do not want to be holding Ethereum at any point in the next sort of 12 to 24 months unless this downtrend gets broken and we could see a period of ETH outperforming Bitcoin. But for now, that hasn't happened. We've seen another rejection, and I suspect we are probably going to come back and take out all of these lows before the market turns bullish in 2027 stroke to early 2028. And look, it's not looking much better for other altcoins. I know people have been really excited about altcoins, and they always are. Everybody always claims that we're on the brink of alt season. Alt season has only happened twice in the history of Bitcoin. Once was in 2017, early 2018, and the other was in 2021. And despite the fact that in what have we had? Bitcoin's been around for 16 years now. And despite the fact that we've only had 2 periods of huge outperformance of altcoins versus Bitcoin in 16 years of cryptocurrency, everybody always thinks we are on the brink of another one of those periods, and I just can't see it. And yes, that doesn't mean that we can't have strong periods of altcoin performance. I mean, if you were lucky enough or clever enough, I should say again, to buy XRP in late 2024, clearly you've done well. We had about a month where this was just pumping like crazy, and we went from 50 cents, we've come all the way up into $3.60. But I said here at the peak, and I have not moved these blue squiggles since I drew them back in the summer. I said that we would take out these highs, we would get back underneath, and that would be the first sign that this was bearish and rolling over. And that's exactly what happened. Now this support zone here is holding at the moment, but eventually I expect this to break, and when it does, it will open the door for much, much lower prices. And I know people think I'm completely crazy, but I believe that XRP is going to come all the way back into this region here, potentially take out these 2020 COVID lows at about 10 cents. And interestingly, if that happens, this starts to look like one massive accumulation range, and I will be looking to buy those lows if we get there at about 10 cents, because this on a macro scale will start to look like an unbelievable buying opportunity before the price potentially heads into 6 figures, potentially $100, $200 over the coming years. Now that's a way off, and we will have to wait and see how the market plays out, because it's potentially the case that this low at 10 cents may not hold, and maybe the entire altcoin market just totally collapses if we get a financial crisis that's big enough. But for now, My thesis is that we're heading lower. We're heading back to these lows at 10 cents. And at that price, depending on what's happening with the rest of the market, risk return will be seriously in favor of anybody that is bullish here in a way that, frankly, it's just not at the moment. Last couple of charts, and then I'll wrap it up because I know I've been going on for quite some time. Excuse me. Solana. Look, uptrend. People have been pointing to this uptrend for a long time. The entire period of this distribution, everybody has been waiting for a retest of this uptrend and a bounce into the stratosphere. Everybody is claiming that Solana's on the brink of going to $1,000 plus. I cannot see it. This looks like a period of massive distribution before a change in trend. Again, another coin where we've taken out the previous all-time high, but we've not been able to sustain price action above it. So we took out the $250, $60 mark that we put in late 2021. And look, this has been an amazing run, right? If you've got in here in the $10 region and managed to ride it up, even where we are now, you're up 13x over the last couple of years. But that doesn't mean that price is going to continue to produce those kind of gains forevermore. And for me, the fact that we've headed back to the lower boundary of this distribution range, the fact that this massive uptrend that has been in place since late 2020, so for the last 5 years, this uptrend has held price, has been broken, it just tells me that something is not right. And if you zoom out enough, you know, what does this to me looks like a high, a higher low, and unfortunately this is starting to look like on a high enough time frame, an equal high that cannot be sustained, and price will have to come back lower over the coming months. And I anticipate that price is potentially going as low as $8 to come back and retest these 2022 bear market lows. But it's possible that it could go even lower. And were we to come into this $4 region, $4 or $5 back here, I would anticipate that this huge support here would act as a massive buying opportunity. And who knows, Solana could go on an absolutely, you know, ginormous run in the years that follow if we do get this big correction. But for now, I will not be buying the tail end of distribution and the break of a massive uptrend that has been in place for the last 5 years. And the last one, you know, some of these just look dreadful because at least Solana made a new high. I mean, if you bought Solana near the lows and you sold it near the highs, happy days. But anybody who's been holding Doge over the last few years will just be frustrated because this thing has looked promising on multiple occasions, but just hasn't produced a new high since 2021. And now what we're starting to see, which I think is really worrying, is that we've got this key support and resistance zone here at about 16 cents. That has given way. We're now holding under that, and you can see that this has held as support, resistance, deviation, resistance, support, and it's broken again. So if I were a Doge holder, I would be worried because this uptrend that price has been bouncing off since the 2023 lows, this uptrend has now given way, and price is holding underneath this key support and resistance zone at 16 cents. So worrying times. And again, you won't be surprised. And I know if you're new here, if you're new to some of my predictions, you will think this guy's crazy. There's absolutely no way that Doge is heading back to below one cent. But honestly, I think the chickens are going to come home to roost in the altcoin market. These coins are speculative assets that still have no proven utility in the real world. And if we get a financial crisis at some point in 2026, if the markets tighten up, and you can go back and look at some of my other videos to see why that may be happening. If traditional markets start to suffer and Bitcoin and altcoins have already started to make lower lows, then boy oh boy, it could get really, really messy. And for me personally, I do not want to be holding crypto during that period of risk unless something fundamentally changes and Bitcoin maybe breaks to the upside and starts to hold above the 125 zone, which were the highs that we put in earlier this year. Unless that happens, and unless we see something dramatically change on this chart here, the stablecoin dominance, maybe we break back under this downtrend, which I think is highly unlikely at the moment. But unless that happens, I will not be holding Doge, Solana, XRP. In my view, all of these are heading much, much lower. You don't have to believe me when I say that this could head to 10 cents. None of this is intended to give you advice. This is just the market as I see it. And for me, there is nothing bullish about these setups, particularly Solana and Doge. They just look absolutely cooked. And like I say, this could take 6 months of sideways price action before we see more downside. It doesn't matter to me. I'm not feeling any sort of FOMO. We could rally all the way back up and maybe even make a sort of failed reclaim of this trend line. I still believe that altcoins are heading much, much, much lower than anyone can anticipate. So I hope you've enjoyed that. I hope some of that has been useful. Like I say, none of these charts are new, but just an opportunity to check in and test whether the hypothesis that I've been laying out this year still stands. And of course, as you've seen in these charts, it does. And I believe that we are going to continue to grind lower over the next 18 to 24 months. And if you want to stay in touch with my analysis, then please do follow me over on X at Part-Time Charts and hit the subscribe button here. Help me grow the channel. I would massively appreciate it. Take care.